Something quietly terrifying happens the moment you realize the life you've been living is too small for the truth that's waking inside you. Not because the world changes, but because you begin to see that the world was never what you thought it was. A familiar room rearranges itself. A comfortable identity trembles. And suddenly the floor beneath your certainty develops a hairline crack. Spiritual awakening never begins with light. It begins with rupture. Like a seed split open underground, in the dark, with no promise that the pressure will lead to anything at all. You feel the fracture before the flowering, the disorientation before the clarity, the unmaking before the becoming. This first portal, the shattering of the familiar, is feared because it feels like death wearing the mask of confusion. The end of narratives, the end of guarantees, the end of who you were taught to be. People cling to the collapsing walls, not realizing they were never walls at all, only the scaffolding of borrowed beliefs. We don't fear truth. We fear losing the illusions we thought were keeping us safe. The mind resists with all its strength. It whispers, go back, forget this, stay small. But there is an ancient intelligence within you, older than the mind, older than memory, that nudges you gently forward. Not out of force, but out of inevitability. Growth does not negotiate. And so you stand at the threshold of the unfamiliar, trembling yet drawn forward, sensing that something vast is stirring beneath your ribs. You cannot name it yet. You can only feel the subtle pull, like a tide rising against the shore of your old self. The first portal opens not with understanding, but with surrender, a quiet acceptance that the life you knew is too narrow for the truth that is coming. The second portal is darker than people expect. Not malevolent, just honest in a way the ego rarely survives. It arrives not as an enemy, but as a mirror no longer willing to distort your reflection. This portal forces you to meet the parts of yourself you buried beneath achievement, politeness, distraction, and spiritual aesthetics. Most people fear this passage because it strips away the stories they tell themselves about being good or right. Suddenly, motives are revealed to be tangled. Desires show their claws. Insecurities leak through the cracks like cold wind under a closed door. What you've hidden from yourself steps into the light. But shadows, contrary to our instinct, are not wounds. They are invitations. The forest knows this. Walk deep enough into its quiet heart, and you will notice how the tallest trees grow out of the darkest soil. The same is true for the human spirit. Everything luminous about you rises from a depth you once feared to touch. Yet the ego panics, it tightens. It wants to stay composed, admirable, controlled. It prefers a polished mask over the rawness of truth. But awakening does not negotiate with masks. It dissolves them. And the dissolution hurts only because you cling. The shadow does not come to accuse you. It comes to free you from the war between who you are and who you pretend to be. It teaches you the difference between guilt and responsibility, between shame and tenderness, between fear and the longing to be seen. If you can stand still before this mirror, without flinching, you will discover something strange and beautiful. The shadow you feared was simply the younger version of you, waiting to be acknowledged and finally allowed to rest. The second portal closes softly behind you, not with judgment, but with understanding. The third portal is not a moment, it is an absence. A quiet so vast that the mind feels naked inside it. This silence is not the simple lack of sound. It is the collapse of inner chatter, the dissolving of thoughts that once marched endlessly like soldiers. When this portal opens, you become aware of how loud your life had become, not outside but within. Most people fear this silence because it confronts them with the emptiness they've been outrunning. It asks nothing, yet reveals everything. It tells the truth without speaking. Imagine standing at the edge of a great ocean at night. The waves have calmed. The world holds its breath. The vastness is overwhelming, yet strangely intimate. That is the silence of this portal, a presence so immense it feels like the universe leaning close. The mind panics here. It searches for distractions, for narratives, for noise, anything to avoid dissolving into the quiet, because the silence does not preserve the self. It erases its boundaries. And to the ego, that feels like annihilation. But silence is not the enemy of self. It is the birthplace of a deeper one. In this stillness, you begin to notice the subtle rhythm of existence. The breath moving through you, the pulse behind your ribs, the spaciousness between thoughts. You feel the world not as something happening out there, but as something unfolding within you. Silence reveals what has always been true. You were never separate from anything. This portal humbles you. It softens you. It begins to rearrange the architecture of your perception. And as you move through it, a strange peace emerges, not from control, but from surrender. The mind grows quiet not because it is defeated, but because it finally realizes it doesn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. The silence consumes the noise, and in doing so, it gives birth to clarity. This portal is feared the most because it threatens what you hold closest, your sense of self. Not the soul, not the essence, but the personality you've spent your whole life constructing like a fragile sculpture. Name, roles, achievements, wounds, preferences, opinions. This collection of stories feels like you. And when awakening deepens, its edges begin to blur. Most people try to go back at this point. The ego whispers hold on reinforce, reveal. But awakening does not attack your identity. It simply reveals that it was never solid. It was a temporary arrangement, useful, beautiful, necessary even, but not ultimate. This portal feels like stepping into mist. You reach for who you were, and your hand passes through smoke. The stories you clung to lose their weight. Labels become too small. You realize you are not the character you play, but the awareness watching the story unfold. It is liberating and terrifying, because the mind wants definition, clarity, certainty. It wants something to hold. But this portal gives you nothing to hold, and that is its gift. Imagine a caterpillar dissolving inside the chrysalis. Not transforming, not evolving, dissolving. That is what this stage feels like. The structure breaks before the wings appear. The old dissolves before the new emerges. The identity weakens because it must make space for something far more spacious. There is grief here, the quiet sorrow of letting go of who you thought you had to be. But there is also an undercurrent of relief, like dropping a burden you didn't realize you were carrying. The disintegration of identity is not the loss of self. It is the rediscovery of freedom. And the portal closes as gently as it opened, leaving behind a strange, luminous emptiness, the kind that makes room for truth to arrive. Awakening drags you toward a truth the ego would rather ignore. Control is a story, not a reality. You can influence, shape, respond, but you cannot command the currents of existence. The fifth portal forces you to confront this with painful clarity. This is the passage where life begins to dismantle your illusion of mastery. Plans fall apart. Relationships shift. Expectations dissolve. The universe rearranges itself in ways you didn't approve of. And suddenly, the grip you maintained for years begins to tremble. Most people fear this portal more than they admit, because letting go feels like falling. But consider the river. It does not control its path. It follows the pull of gravity, carving landscapes without forcing anything. Its power lies not in resistance, but in surrender. Human beings forget this. We cling to timelines, to outcomes, to identities that feel safe. And when awakening arrives, it tears through these attachments like a storm breaking through a valley. But storms are not punishments. They are transformations in disguise. The collapse of control is not chaos, it is clarity. A revelation that life moves with or without your permission. And your suffering comes not from the movement, but from resisting the movement. In this portal, you begin to see how much energy you spent trying to manage the uncontrollable. You feel the exhaustion that once hid behind your ambition, and slowly something softens. The hands that once clutched so tightly begin to open. Surrender is not weakness, it is cooperation with reality. And when you finally release the illusion of control, you notice something miraculous. Life carries you with a gentleness you never knew was possible. The fifth portal doesn't take your power, it returns it. Strange as it sounds, awakening often brings a loneliness deeper than anything you felt in the years you were asleep. Not because you are abandoned, but because you have stepped into a space within yourself so vast, so uncharted, that few around you can understand it. This portal is the echo of your own expansion. Most people fear this passage because it feels like exile. They look around and wonder, why does everything feel distant now? Why can't I return to the old world of noise, distraction, or belonging? But the loneliness here is not emptiness. It is spaciousness misunderstood. When the sky opens after a storm, the horizon feels wider. When the mind opens after illusion, the self feels larger. This widening can feel isolating at first, not because you are alone, but because you've grown beyond the places where you once sought comfort. Conversations feel thinner. Small talk becomes hollow. Old desires lose their color. You stand in the midst of your life, but you feel like a traveler passing through a landscape you no longer fully inhabit. Yet within this portal lies a quiet truth. Loneliness is not the absence of others. It is the absence of distraction from yourself. This portal invites you to sit with your own presence, to befriend it, to feel the contours of your inner world without turning away, to understand that your company was always meant to be a sanctuary, not a prison. Eventually, the loneliness shifts. It softens. It ripens into solitude. And solitude is where the soul begins to speak. You discover a warmth inside you that does not depend on anyone's approval or understanding. A companionship with your own awareness that feels ancient, steady, and unconditionally present. What felt like isolation becomes intimacy with existence itself. The sixth portal is not a desert. It is the wide open sky finally inviting you to breathe. If the earlier portals cracked your identity, this one dissolves it. The seventh portal is a symbolic death, not of the body, not of life, but of the self you once thought was permanent. This is the quiet funeral of the person you were before awakening began. It does not happen dramatically. It happens like dusk slipping into night. You wake one morning and realize you no longer believe the stories that used to comfort you. You no longer fear the threats that once controlled you. You no longer identify with the wounds you used to wear like armor. Something has ended, quietly, decisively, irrevocably. Most people fear this portal because they mistake death for loss. But this death is liberation disguised as disappearance. Consider the snake shedding its skin. The snake does not mourn the old layer. It simply outgrew it. In the same way, awakening leads you to shed identities that once felt essential: the victim, the warrior, the pleaser, the skeptic, the achiever, the wounded one. These characters fall away like autumn leaves returning to the soil. And underneath all these layers, you find something startling: stillness, presence, a self that does not need a story to exist. There is grief here, yes, the gentle grieving of a life that has served its purpose. You may feel waves of nostalgia for an older version of yourself, even if that version was suffering. Familiarity is hard to release. But as you move through this portal, the grief becomes gratitude. You begin to see that nothing was wasted. Every layer had a function. Every identity protected you until you were strong enough to let it go. The death of the old self is not an ending. It is the clearing of space for the truth to emerge quietly like dawn. In this portal, you are not becoming something new. You are returning to what you always were. After the symbolic death, a subtle cleansing begins. The eighth portal is the unburdening of emotional weight, the quiet release of sorrows you didn't realize you were carrying. These emotions do not leave as explosions, they leave as exhalations. Awakening brings an unexpected softness. Old memories rise not to haunt you, but to be freed. Old griefs return not as wounds, but as guests ready to depart. Most people fear this portal because they mistake emotional release for regression. They assume they are going backward or breaking down. But you are not unraveling, you are unloading. The heart is letting go of what it no longer needs to protect you from. Think of a mountain after winter, shedding its snow. The melting looks like collapse, but it is nourishment. The river flows because the weight has finally dissolved. In the same way, tears that once felt heavy now feel cleansing. Sadness becomes spacious. Anger becomes clarity. Fear becomes humility. You learn to feel without drowning, to release without resisting. Emotions expand and pass through you like clouds drifting across a vast sky. No longer storms, no longer threats, just movements of weather across the landscape of consciousness. The unburdening teaches a profound truth: emotions only cling when they are unloved. Once felt, fully and compassionately, they evaporate. Through this portal, your capacity for tenderness grows. You begin to understand others more gently, because you have finally learned to understand yourself without judgment. And in this tenderness, deeper layers of presence open. The heart, once guarded by years of survival, begins to trust again. This portal ends not with triumph, but with lightness, the simple relief of carrying less. This portal feels like standing under a bright, uncompromising sun. No shadows, no disguises, no softened angles. Just truth, raw, unfiltered, and liberating. Radical honesty is not about confessing every secret or exposing every flaw. It is about no longer lying to yourself, no longer pretending, no longer using illusions to soften the discomfort of reality. Most people fear this portal because self-deception is subtle. It feels safe, comforting, familiar. We create entire identities out of half-truths. We wear masks so long we forget they are masks. But awakening burns through these illusions like wildfire through old grass. In this portal you begin to see your real motives, not the ones you wanted to have, but the ones you truly had. You see where your generosity was a plea for love, where your confidence hid insecurity, where your anger concealed fear, where your spirituality masked avoidance. And instead of judgment, you meet yourself with compassion. Radical honesty is not harsh, it is clarifying. It strips away the unnecessary drama and reveals the simplicity of being. You stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be real. You stop seeking validation and begin seeking authenticity. You stop performing and start existing. There is peace in truth even when it stings. Because truth requires no maintenance. Illusion does. In this portal, relationships change. Some deepen, some dissolve, some reveal their true nature. Your life begins to rearrange itself around what is real rather than what was convenient. This honesty becomes a quiet liberation, not loud, not dramatic, just deeply, undeniably true. You emerge from this portal lighter, clearer, and strangely relieved, because nothing is heavier than pretending. This is the portal where the mind surrenders to mystery, where logic kneels before the sheer complexity of existence, not as defeat, but as reverence. The paradoxes begin to reveal themselves. You are everything and nothing. You are the observer and the observed. You are insignificant and infinite. You are temporary and eternal. Most people fear this portal because the mind is built to categorize, to divide, to simplify. But awakening dissolves the boundaries the mind once guarded. It reveals that opposites are not enemies, they are partners in the cosmic dance. Night defines day, stillness defines movement, death defines life, and somehow everything makes sense precisely because it doesn't. This paradox is not confusion, it is clarity born from surrender. You begin to see that contradictions coexist without conflict, like waves and ocean, flames and warmth, roots and branches. You no longer demand certainty, you live in fluidity. You participate in the mystery instead of trying to solve it. The mind becomes elastic. The heart becomes spacious. Awareness expands beyond the linear. This portal humbles you into awe. You stop trying to own the universe and start becoming intimate with it. And gradually, the paradoxes stop frightening you. They start teaching you. The divine paradox reveals that truth is not a destination. It is a horizon that moves with you. This portal dismantles one of the ego's oldest illusions, the illusion of complete autonomy. It teaches you a truth that feels fragile. At first, you are not in control of the great tides that move your life. But this realization is not disempowering, it is sacred. Powerlessness here does not mean weakness, it means alignment. It means accepting that the river of existence is far wiser than the boats floating on its surface. Most people fear this portal because they equate surrender with defeat. But surrender in awakening is not collapsing. It is unburdening yourself from the impossible task of micromanaging the universe. A leaf does not choose the wind. A wave does not choose the tide. And yet both move with grace. Through this portal you begin to see your place in the vast architecture of existence. You participate, but you do not command. You influence, but you do not dictate. You respond, but you do not control. And in this realization, peace begins. You no longer fight reality. You cooperate with it. You stop swimming upstream against currents that were never meant to be conquered. You learn to flow, to adapt, to trust. You begin to treat life not as an adversary, but as a partner. This sacred powerlessness becomes freedom. Because the moment you stop trying to control everything, you become available to everything. The universe moves through you, not against you. Life becomes lighter, not because it changes, but because you no longer resist its nature. This portal ends with a soft surrender, a surrender that feels like finally exhaling after years of holding your breath. This portal feels like waking up inside a vast web of existence, realizing that nothing is isolated. Nothing is separate, nothing stands alone. The illusion of individuality begins to soften, revealing the quiet truth of connection that has always been there. Most people fear this portal because it dissolves the boundaries they spent a lifetime building. It challenges the belief that I and others are distinct worlds. But awakening shows you the subtle threads linking everything: breath, movement, thought, emotion, presence. You begin to sense that every choice ripples outward. Every word carries weight. Every action participates in a larger harmony. Like trees connected through roots beneath the forest floor, you realize humanity shares an inner network of consciousness, invisible yet profoundly real. You feel the sadness of others in your own chest. You feel the joy of strangers as if it were your own. Empathy becomes instinct, not effort. This portal invites you to soften your judgments, to see beyond the surface of people's behaviors, to sense the fear behind anger, the longing behind pride, the wound behind cruelty. You realize that everyone is walking their own labyrinth, carrying invisible burdens, searching for a moment of peace. And in this recognition, compassion blooms. Not sentimental compassion, sacred compassion, the kind that arises when you see yourself in everyone and everyone in yourself. The boundaries between my life and the world begin to dissolve. You become porous to existence, open to connection, receptive to subtle wisdom that cannot be taught, but only felt. The portal of interconnectedness reveals a truth too simple for the mind and too obvious for the ego. You have never been alone. You have always been a thread in the infinite tapestry of being. Freedom, as most people imagine it, is the absence of restraint. But this portal reveals a deeper truth. Freedom is the absence of illusion. And when illusions fall away, what remains is a kind of groundlessness, a liberation without guarantees, without anchors, without the familiar stability of old identities. Most people fear groundlessness. They want freedom, but they want it on a leash. Yet true freedom cannot be domesticated. This portal feels like stepping into open sky, nothing beneath you, nothing above you, nothing to cling to. At first it feels terrifying. The ego trembles, searching for structure. But slowly the fear transforms into exhilaration, because the absence of ground is not a fall, it is flight. You begin to realize that certainty was a cage. Predictability was confinement. Identity was a story you outgrew. What looked like chaos becomes creativity. What looked like risk becomes possibility. Freedom here is not about doing whatever you want. It is about no longer being imprisoned by what you fear. You are no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer controlled by the past, no longer driven by unconscious patterns. The groundlessness becomes spaciousness, a vast horizon within you. And in that horizon, a simple truth emerges. You were never meant to be fixed. You were meant to flow. The final portal is the most misunderstood. It is not about ascending into higher realms or becoming permanently enlightened. It is about returning gently, humbly to the ordinary world with new eyes. Awakening doesn't remove you from life. It immerses you more deeply into it. The birds sound different. The air feels lighter. The simplest moments carry a softness you never noticed. You return to the same world, but not as the same person. Most people fear this portal because they expect awakening to be dramatic, a permanent escape from human messiness. But the truth is quieter. You still feel emotions. You still face challenges. You still make mistakes. But everything is seen from a deeper place. You are no longer lost in the storm. You are the sky holding the storm. You engage with people without losing yourself. You listen without absorbing their fear. You love without clinging. You give without emptying. This portal teaches the harmony between the infinite and the ordinary, how to carry vastness in your chest while performing the simplest acts of humanity, washing dishes, speaking gently, you breathing deeply, walking slowly. You realize that enlightenment is not an escape from life's complexity, but a reconciliation with it. The return is not a step backward. It is the completion of the circle. You have crossed through shadow and silence, death and rebirth, grief and liberation. And now you stand where you began, only now you see. The final portal doesn't elevate you above humanity. It roots you within it. You become a quiet presence in the world's soft, steady awake, a reminder that even in the chaos of existence, there is a depth within every human being waiting to be remembered.